his work is so noble that I felt terrible asking him to step away from that just to pay attention to little old me. And that felt really selfish. And so I think we were both trying to be very altruistic in this, but it paralyzed both of us.
I'm Eric Newton, and this is Together, the podcast where we explore the truth about human relationships. As a divorce lawyer, I saw thousands of couples break up firsthand. These days, I'm not so interested in breaking couples up, nor in keeping them together. I'm interested in what our relationships can teach us about ourselves and the world that we live in. So on this show, we have honest conversations with real people about real relationships. You've probably heard me say that in my view, challenging times are inevitable. That it's not so much about avoiding difficulties in our relationships as using them to deepen our connections to one another. In fact, that's in my introduction these days. But this is easier said than done. When any of us are facing difficult times, we inevitably wonder if those times will ever end. And we ask ourselves questions like, are we broken? Or are we beyond hope? Or do we have personal value? But the dark times do eventually pass. And when they do, most of us look back and we're grateful for what we experienced. Challenges help us to mature and to appreciate the fullness of life. But remembering that and surviving the moment can be a trick. Our guests today, Ned and Dorcas, share a story about a depression that lasted nearly 5 years and how they not only survived it, but built a very successful company during that time and also started a family that's now thriving. The story is about the tool that they used to survive those times and how they weren't always conscious that they were in fact using that tool. Rather than giving away what they did, as always, I'll let our couple tell the story. So with that, let's go to our interview with Ned and Dorcas.
So Ned and I knew each other for 7 years before we got married, and we had been best friends that entire time.
Wow.
And we were in college together and spent like almost every minute that we could together. And there was this real intimacy in our relationship from the very, very beginning, just because we shared everything. And so to go from that to, and Ned was doing these other businesses along the way, but it really wasn't until he went to business school and then started the company that he's with now that he became focused in this way that I hadn't seen before. And so to go from, this is my best friend who I want to spend all of my time with, to feeling like he was constantly choosing his work over me.
Oh, yeah.
That just was so painful.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was really what Ned intended at the time, but he was just so passionate about the work that he was doing. And to constantly feel like I have been demoted, I am now a very distant second in his life and in his priorities. That was really, really hurtful. And I didn't quite know how to put words to what was going on for me.
I'm imagining that on your side, Ned, you probably weren't fully articulated about what was going on for you either, but that there was some element that was saying, but I'm doing this for you. That's probably running through your head. So am I right in that guess?
Yeah, I think, for what was going on in my head, number one, I felt really guilty. So I could see she was upset. She wasn't happy. So I felt this tremendous sense of guilt. But I also sensed this tremendous sense of, gosh, I'm called to do this thing, and this is going to change people's lives. It's going to be impactful. And actually, Dorcas and I, we had talked about specifically me going to business school to start a company to do something to actually, leverage technology to really positively impact people's lives. That's exactly what I was doing. So I felt like I was doing what I was meant to be doing.
Right.
And so there was this weird tension of okay, I feel really guilty, but I feel paralyzed. I don't know what to do about it. but then there's this thing that I'm very clearly called to do, so I should keep doing that, and then figure out how to make Dorcas happy in some way, but I kind of didn't know how to do that. So it always felt like I was kind of either really dissatisfying her, or I would be sacrificing something in the business that felt important.
I should add that I felt guilty too, because his work is so noble that I felt terrible asking him to step away from that just to pay attention to little old me. And that felt really selfish. And so I think we were both trying to be very altruistic in this, but it paralyzed both of us.
What does it mean to be called to something?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I feel like, in this case, so I'll tell you a little bit about what the company does to start with, just to give you that sense, a few lines on it. Basically we make solar-powered products for people without access to electricity. We work all throughout Africa, South Asia, and these products significantly improve people's quality of life. And we felt like when we started the company, businesses weren't taking that seriously. So technology was typically kind of used for essentially making rich people incrementally happier. But this was a way to leverage technology in a way that really transformed people's lives in really meaningful ways. So, in terms of the calling I felt around this, I think it even started before business school. I really had this, I knew that I loved entrepreneurship, and that was kind of what I was wired to do. At the same time, honestly, like making a lot of money never really appealed that much to me. And Dorcas was kind of wired in this same way. But kind of making a positive impact in the world, leaving the world better than where we found it, was something that was really important to me. So when I discovered this kind of notion of social enterprise, of entrepreneurship that could be leveraged to make people's lives better, it just felt like that's what I was meant to do. It's hard to kind of describe, but it's like something clicked inside, like this is what I'm meant, this is why I'm on earth and what I'm meant to do. Yeah. And I think, Dorcas felt that too.
And I saw that in him. I saw how clearly focused and excited and passionate Ned was in a way that I hadn't seen before. And so that, on the one hand, I think it was amazing because so many people are searching for that sense of purpose, and that he found it. I was thrilled for him. But at the same time, it was causing all this tension in our relationship.
Really, truly, it is the case that you were no longer the most important thing, because he had this concept of a calling, this like outside force that was more important than you, or arguably even than him. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree it is. I think that if you had asked me, like, would you choose Dorcas over Delight, I would say I choose Dorcas. And we've talked about that before. But, I think there was that sense also when Dorcas and I dated, actually. And maybe I'm weird in this way, but I felt like this is the one. I kind of knew sort of early on. It's almost in that same sense I felt of the calling of the business. So to me, it wasn't like a rank order thing, but I felt like I needed to do both. I needed to be a good husband to Dorcas, and I needed to do this enterprise. And kind of taking one out of the picture almost didn't make sense. It was like how my life wouldn't be complete either way. So I wasn't willing to sacrifice really one for the other, but it felt like the demands that each were placing on my life were kind of pushing in opposite directions.
Oh, that is so painful. Now you guys are in this place where it is a thing in the past and you've resolved it. But how did you get from there to here? There
have been a lot of low points, I think, that pushed us to do things differently. Right? I mean, to some degree, I think a lot of people are like that, where you don't change until you have to. And we got to several points where we had to make changes because one of us was going to lose it if we didn't. So in China is a really good example. We had been working, I don't know, probably 14-hour days, 7 days a week for months and months on end, living in this industrial city in China where there's very little to do, and everybody is kind of unhappy there. And it was just a really, really difficult place. And it was just so stressful. That was the very early days of the company. And so things were really up and down, really uncertain. And I got to the point where I became so depressed. I mean, I just burned out in this really, really spectacular way. So I was super depressed, super anxious, had a hard time even leaving our apartment, and definitely could barely go to work, couldn't function very well. And so that was a big red flag for us as a couple of like, what we're doing right now, it's not working. I am headed in a very, very bad direction. I don't know how much lower I can go. And so that was a wake up call for us that something needs to change. And so I stopped working, or I think I drastically reduced my work hours. Ned was my boss, so he was luckily very willing to work with me on that. And, he was the one who told me, like, don't go into the office anymore, work from home, work fewer hours, do whatever you need to do to be well. And, he hired people to take over some of my other responsibilities. And I think actually in that really, really difficult moment, when I heard the things that Ned was saying, I saw the things that he was doing, that was one of the clearest moments for me of seeing, like, oh, Ned still, like, he really, really, really loves me, because he is doing all of these things to try to take care of me. Like, when I hit rock bottom, he saw how unwell I was, and he was willing to even make business sacrifices so that I would be well. I think one way in which we have been able to make it through everything we've been through for the last 19 years is because there's always been security in our relationship, like a really, really strong sense of security. And we both sacrificed things just to be together, even just to date. Yeah. And so I think there was already this sense of, no, we're willing to be there for each other, even if it's hard, even if other people question our decision. I think it was just guilt around the business of like, I'm harming the business. I'm making it harder for Ned to focus on his job. How many people are not getting electricity because I'm just too weak to be able to handle it?
I'm trying to get the distinction between if the guilt was just a shitty feeling,
yeah,
and that was the end of it,
yeah,
or if it was actually if there was some underlying wisdom, if it was trying to force an action.
For me, the guilt came from having very high standards of myself and feeling like, I had this sense of calling, like what Ned talked about as well. I had worked in the nonprofit sector for about a decade. And so I think I had my sense of value and worth came from my ability to do something meaningful. And when that was taken away from me, when I just was so tired and so depressed that I couldn't work anymore, it was like I didn't know who I was anymore. Yeah. And that was a very scary feeling, to feel like there's nothing left of me. I'm just this body sitting here, but I'm not doing anything. I'm not contributing to the world. I'm not productive. And yeah, that felt awful. But I think it was an important reckoning of needing to face how much I had relied on my work to give me that sense of value. And so I think Ned and I both have been on this years-long journey of trying to figure out, okay, how do we value ourselves even when we're not working?
Yeah. Amen to that.
And that's like a lifelong
It is, right?
quest.
I mean, where does value even come from? What the hell even is it?
Yeah.
All right, it's time to take a break so that I can thank today's sponsors for the show, Zola.com. That's Zola.com. Zola is the wedding company that will do anything for love. They're reinventing the wedding planning and registry experience to make the happiest moments in our couples' lives even happier. Okay, now that's their tagline, but the truth is, Zola is actually pretty great. Now, you may not know this, but I go to a lot of weddings. I don't think it has to do with this show. It's just a fact of life. But Aubrey and I have been to something like 25 weddings in the last 2 years. It's ridiculous. But I'll tell you, whenever the bride and groom set up a Zola website, it's always the easiest to navigate. And the reason is because they've figured out how to combine all of the wedding information that you need with the registry. It all goes together in one nice, tidy package. It's very easy to navigate. They've got an iPhone app so that couples can manage their registries on the go. They offer price matching and free shipping. They've got a host of wedding planning tools. It's really pretty great. So to sign up with Zola and receive a $50 credit towards your registry, go to zola.com/couples. That's ZOLA.com/couples. Now back to the show. Okay, now, so you get to Hong Kong and you're getting into therapy and you're interacting socially with other people, and then did the knot just start to unravel there? Is that what happened? Like you started to realize the mechanism of what had been making you feel so terrible before, or was there a specific moment?
Yeah, it was a very, very long process. I think probably took me at least 5 years to come back from that. I mean, that's how low I was. And therapy helped, having friends helped. Writing was actually a huge part of the process because I would, there's this book called The Artist's Way.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the writer recommends is that you write what's called morning pages, is you wake up and you just write for, 20 minutes, and it's completely unfiltered, unedited stream of consciousness, and you just write. And that's what I did. And I did that for about 1.5 years. I would just wake up, and I didn't have kids then, so it was really easy to do that. I could just wake up, pick up my journal, and just write and get everything out of my head. And for months and months, pretty much all I wrote was questions, like, why is this happening to me?
Yes.
Why is this so hard? What is wrong with me? What am I supposed to get out of this experience? Where can I go from here? And so it was just getting those questions out and really, really wrestling with them. And I think really coming to terms with, I am not a perfect person. I am not a person who can just be hyper productive. I'm not going to change the world by myself. I'm not going to help 1 billion people by myself. And just becoming aware of those realities and then becoming okay with them. I think that was the harder part, was accepting that and recognizing, like, hey, I just am who I am and I can offer the little bit that I can to the world, and I may see some changes from that and I may not, and that's okay.
Yeah. It's so good. Such a cathartic process.
Yeah. But painful.
But painful,
painful,
right? Totally is. Yes. And when you're in that pain, you cannot remember that there is something called not pain.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just so stuck in it. It seems like that's how the world will always be, which is why you need partners. You guys have this lovely way of being with each other. You're tender and you're sweet, and you obviously adore each other, and you've been together a long time. Mm-hmm. And you knew she was the one from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And yet there was this middle period that she describes as being about 5 or 6 years long. That must have been hard for you. You weren't emotionally suffering the way she was, but you were in a relationship with somebody who was. What did you feel about that?
was a tough time for both of us. I felt somewhat helpless with Dorcas. I didn't really know what to do. It seemed like nothing I would say would really make a difference. We tried to kind of set, okay, here's some concrete actions we're going to do. But clearly I was not sufficient to like solve all her issues. And I think that was one of the things that was a learning for me, is that, I'm the kind of person who wants to go in and like fix stuff and like, make it right. And I felt also kind of responsible for what had happened to Dorcas. I really wanted to kind of fix what was going on for her. But I think I could see her suffering, and I felt like I couldn't solve it.
Did you ever feel you felt like you couldn't solve it? Did that equate to hopelessness?
No, and I think that's probably my personality. I never really, there's always a way, I feel like. I knew, though, that there would be a time when she would be better. I really kind of had that faith and optimism, I would say, but I wasn't clear exactly how we would get there.
I mean, it's funny now looking back. I think we applied some of what we had learned through doing a startup on our own personal lives, in terms of, I think with starting a business, a lot of times you feel like you run into these dead ends, and then you have to figure out a different way of doing things. And so I felt like we had to apply a lot of creativity to our own situation, because it seemed like we kept running into these situations where what Ned wanted and what I wanted were not compatible. And so we had to find creative ways to work around that. Or, when I was not doing well, I just needed to keep trying different things to figure out, like, what do I need to heal from this? What do I need to get to a better place? And yeah, and I think that's part of why it took so long. That being said, I think there is something healthy about that, in terms of like, then I went really, really deep into dealing with my own issues and uncovering layer after layer of neuroses and challenges that I had. And so I think that allowed me to get to a healthier place today than I would have if we had sort of just glossed over those challenges.
What I'm interested in is how you guys, like the conceptual enzyme that you two use to digest those really challenging moments, because you had 5 years of depression where you were, he could have decided during that 5 years that you were dead weight, but he didn't. You had 5 years of depression. Meanwhile, you said things during that time that you wished you hadn't, Ned. And now you guys have this whole textured, deep, rich relationship. And I'm just curious why you think you didn't destroy each other during that time.
I think it's because we had such a strong foundation of friendship from the beginning. And I feel like we saw each other kind of grow up from when we were freshmen in college to where we, where we had kind of become. And I think, when, if I kind of like flared up out of stress, or Dorcas, said stuff, I think we both could kind of compartmentalize those things as like, well, that's not like sort of the real, that's not really what you think. You're just saying that because you're in this bad place. I feel like we were able to not let it sort of like haunt or linger.
I think maybe it's because we've known each other for so long, but I do feel like Ned and I have a very strong sense of empathy for one another, of recognizing like, oh, he's having a hard time. And even though he's lashing out, and, I'm going to choose not to let that be something that I carry,
Do you ever wonder if you might slip back into that state of being that you were during that period?
Yeah, I definitely do. Because I think our time in China was the worst, but it wasn't the only time that that's happened. I had burned out in my work a couple years before we even moved. And then after our first son was born, I don't know if it was postpartum stuff or if it was just me, but I had a period of very high anxiety for a while as well. And I think the sad reality is it's kind of wired in me now. Is I think I'm just kind of susceptible to that, and I've just come to accept that. And I think Ned and I both are learning how to work around that. And I think one important lesson that I have learned through all of this is that I, used to be very self-sufficient and very much like I am going to take care of myself. I'm going to do everything on my own. And I have learned how valuable it is to ask for help and to realize that I need other people and that that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's anything, horribly wrong with me. That I think that's just the human condition, right? Is we need one another.
Yeah.
And there's something very beautiful that can happen when you allow yourself to ask for help and receive help from other people. So I am all about seeking help when I need it. And I think Ned and I both have really learned the warning signs of when I'm starting to tip over toward either depression or anxiety. And then that's when, so we don't wait until things are terrible to make changes. We preemptively make changes when we see things headed in that direction.
And it goes that way with actually my own stress levels too, because Dorcas can see it really early. Like we're so attuned to each other now that she knows even sometimes before I do, because honestly, I'm not that in touch with my own emotions, just as my reality until like they really hit me. So it'll kind of come out in behaviors and stuff first. So Dorcas will sort of realize it and say like, hey, you're stressed out. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Actually, I am. And she can help kind of, then we can kind of take a break or, do something that can kind of cool me off a little bit. In the same way with Dorcas, if I see that she's going down that path, I can sort of like let her know. Or like say, hey, you're kind of committing to too many things. I think you're going to burn yourself out. And she'll be like, oh, you're right. So I feel like it gives, because we've been through all this, we have that perspective on each other. So we can kind of hold each other, accountable or, keep each other in check from our own neuroses.
Now, this hypothetical I'm thinking about now is just a hypothetical. It's a counterfactual, but what if, so her thing is melancholy or depression, and yours is stress and stress?
Yeah, stress.
Okay. What if they were flipped? Like, what if the chemicals changed today and suddenly you were facing depression and yours was stress? What would happen in that case? Would you be able to manage it?
Oh, I don't know if I would actually, because it's interesting. Dorcas is, I think she's someone who's really good at like grounding me in reality and sort of the present moment. And I'm someone that I think is good at kind of portraying, hope, optimism, and faith, which is helpful, I think, in addressing depression and kind of pulling her out of the melancholy state. But I don't know if it would be particularly helpful if it was just anxiety. So, that's an interesting question. I don't know if it was flipped the other way around. I think we'd have to do a lot of learning to figure out how to adapt to that.
Yeah, if we lost Ned's optimism in our relationship, I think we'd both sink very quickly.
Yeah, and your groundedness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We pessimists like to say that we're realists, right? Which I think sometimes I feel like I'm bursting Ned's bubble a lot, but at the same time, I think it's also helpful for him to be pulled back down to earth occasionally and to have somebody really prompt him to think through, okay, what are the real life implications of what you're talking about? So like we we actually moved our family to Kenya last year, and we lived there for 7 months with our 4-year-old.
That's exciting.
And after our experience in China, I thought I would never live overseas again. And when this started becoming a possibility, Ned and I sat down, and I think we had a 2 or 3 hour conversation, and we just talked through all the nuts and bolts and the logistics of where are we going to live, where is our son going to go to school, what am I going to do while we're there, what is community going to look like for us, and I don't know without me if Ned would have wanted to address all those questions, but they're important, right?
Did it work?
I mean, to make it sustainable. Yeah, it did. I mean, it wasn't easy, but it actually was a really great experience for us as a family. We really bonded, did some amazing things. Kenya is a gorgeous country, and met some really great people. And we just, had learned some very, very important lessons from our time in China. And so we approached moving to Kenya very differently. Because in China, we just sort of moved with this idea of a dream of we want to do this, and that was it, and we barely thought about anything else. And it really came back to bite us.
And kind of didn't. I mean, you've deepened so much.
Yeah, it's true.
Given all that, what do you see as the main takeaway for you?
I would say that despite how challenging it has all been, it's actually really been worth it. Ned and I have a much deeper relationship. The level of trust that we have in one another is not what it would have been if we hadn't been through so many challenges together, if we hadn't pushed each other so much. I feel like we've both matured significantly as individuals. And so I think I would love for readers to get that sense of hope that, there are going to be moments that feel like, you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel and it's just darkness, but you can really get there, and the other end of it can be really wonderful and really beautiful. And not to say that we don't still have challenges today. There's still a lot of things that we are continuing to work through. But I think we are just so much more grounded as individuals, and there's just now so much history to our relationship that I feel like we can handle almost anything that comes our way.
Yeah, you guys have so much depth at this point. Now, this book is about the entrepreneurial marriage and that dynamic. And I'm guessing you're not saying that every couple should go out and be in that dynamic. That's not going to work for everybody.
No, definitely not.
But is there a should, or is there like a something that you think all couples ought to probably be doing?
Well, I think what's relevant to all couples, regardless of if they're doing a startup or not, is that struggle between balancing your professional ambitions and your relationship.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of folks struggle with that. And I think what I have found, I think one of the big mistakes that we made in our early years of marriage is that it's very easy to approach your career with this sense of urgency and this sense of clarity too of, this is what I need to do to build up my career. I need this job. I need to work in this kind of company. I need to get this sort of promotion or be making this sort of salary. And I think very rarely do we approach our romantic relationships with that same sense of focus and clarity and urgency. I think we're much more likely to put our partners kind of on the back burner because there's a sense of like, oh, he or she, they're always going to be there.
Yeah.
I'll come back to them when I'm less busy with my work. But there's a real cost to making that choice. And so I'd love to just encourage people to think about, how can you have a little bit of that sense of urgency in your relationship too, of like, what can I do now so that I can actually build this really wonderful and rich future with this person that I want to be with?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Any takeaways for you, Ned?
Really like kind of just doing the entrepreneurial experience and kind of wrapping myself up in that without having Dorcas in the mix, I'd be I just wouldn't be anywhere near the same person as I am today. I think having her in my life and the stuff that, we've gone through as a couple has really made me such a better person. So I'm, really grateful.
Well, and I would like to think that it's made you a better businessman too.
Yeah.
You think?
Yeah.
Like, I think so. That Ned would have burned out much sooner in life if I hadn't been that nag to get him to do other things and to make sure that we still had good friends and spent time with family and all that.
Yeah, it's so, I would just say it's been worth it making those investments in the relationship. It's really paid off dividends over time, and it's been, I think in the moment it can feel like a distraction from the things you have to do with work, with the business. But I'm really, really glad that we took the time and invested in our relationship. It's made us both better people.
The theme that stitches this entire interview together for me is the power of shared narrative. Dorcas and Ned know that they are one another's match. They know that their respective businesses make the world a better place. They know that they have a higher calling and that it keeps them moving forward as a unit. And these knowings, they all live in the realm of story. None of these knowings are objectively the truth, nor are they objectively false. But that's not the point. The question of truth or falsity is a red herring. In this case, the power of narrative is that it provides that ever-critical and totally magical component of a satisfying life. It provides purpose, and these two share it. Now, Dorcas wrote a book about her experiences that she talks about on the show. It's called Start, Love, Repeat: How to Stay in Love with Your Entrepreneur in a Crazy Startup World. And you can find more about the book on her website, which is chengtozun.com. That's CHENGTOZUN.com. And I'll have links to that and to the book in our show notes. Don't forget to check out our sponsors for today's show, Zola.com. That's ZOLA.com. For a $50 credit towards your registry, go to Zola.com/couples. If you like our show today, please do subscribe. It's not free to produce our show, and we'd absolutely love your support. You can support our show by going to patreon.com/together. That's patreon.com/together. If you've got questions or comments, or if you'd like to connect, you can find me on social media. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/together show. Twitter and Instagram are both @together_show. And you can always email me at host@together.guide. The music on today's episode was provided by Blue Dot Sessions, and you can find them at sessions.blue. That's all for today, folks. Talk to you soon.